Hey everybody. If you can hear me, I'm going to ask everyone to close your eyes for a second and imagine a Wednesday in October, much like this one. Our story begins not with a headline, but with a cough, a quiet croak at an airport lounge in Dubai, in Sao Paulo, in Barcelona. The cough is the body's response to a string of genetic code engineered by a mind that understood the language of human vulnerability. It was designed with a latency period, calibrated for maximum transmission. It spreads across the globe months before the first fever ever spikes, silently seeding itself. When the symptoms do arrive, they are catastrophic. The virus evades the immune system, intelligently designed to exploit gaps in our defenses. Within weeks, hospitals are overwhelmed. While COVID had a fatality rate of less than 1 in 100, this kills 1 in 5. The most terrifying news comes with the analysis of the genome. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate, engineered attack. With that realization, essential workers choose to stay home and protect their families. They refuse to show up for work at police stations, at fire stations, at hospitals, at grocery stores, at power plants. With them, the complex logistics that undergird modern civilization start to fall apart. Our supply chains start to fall apart. Supply chains for food, for medicine, for oil and gas. The lights go out. You look at the thin seal on your window, at the deadbolt on your door, and realize how terrifyingly insufficient they are to protect against a threat that occupies the very air you breathe. You are left listening to the wet, rattling sound of civilization drowning on dry land. Stories like these may sound like science fiction, and for most of human history, they have been. Not anymore. In the 1990s, it took 13 years, $3 billion, and a small team of some of the world's smartest scientists to sequence a single human being's genome. Today, as we all know, that same thing can be done for $300 in a few hours with an at-home test. And that blinding rate of advance has come not just for the ability to read the genome, but for the ability to edit it and to print the result. We have entered the age of synthetic biology, where the operating system of our bodies, of life itself, is now programmable, hackable, and weaponizable. And at the same time, advances in AI, like the kind our last speaker talked about, are taking the specialized knowledge that used to be required to wield these technologies and distributing it to anyone with an internet connection. Large language models have already shown that they can give detailed step-by-step instructions on how to synthesize known pandemic pathogens, no human expert required. No human expert required. In fact, just last month, researchers at Stanford announced that they had used AI to design entirely new viruses never before created by nature, printed those viruses, and used them to attack antibiotic-resistant E. coli, which is kind of cool. It's really cool, actually. It may herald a future of programmable medicine. But because these technologies, these models, are fundamentally dual use, that is, they can be used for offense and defense. You know, a model that can optimize your immune function can also optimize its dysfunction. A model that can optimize a virus's fitness can also optimize its lethality. And we're already seeing this happen. You know, in 2022, back in the dark ages of AI, pre-ChatGPT, researchers used a model that was designed to create helpful, beneficial drugs, and they inverted it. They ran it in reverse. And in less than 6 hours, it created 40,000 chemical weapons candidates, including some compounds that were more toxic than VX nerve gas. And because it is easier to break something than to build it, and certainly than to put it back together again after it's been broken, these technologies are fundamentally offense dominant. They give attackers an advantage over defenders. It's kind of like in cybersecurity. where defense has to win 100% of the time every single time, and offense only has to win once to break through and create a catastrophe. Except unlike in cybersecurity, a breakthrough can't be patched with a software update. And the threat is not limited to human viruses. We operate under the collective assumption that the stability of our world, the reliability of our agriculture, the integrity of our biology, the very predictability of our atmosphere is a constant. But it is not. It is maintained by the beautiful, fragile dance of countless organisms across the web of life. Picture the fields on either side of a highway. We grow a small number of staple crops: wheat, rice, corn, in monoculture to feed the world. Monoculture for efficiency, but also monoculture in a way that means that a vulnerability to one plant is a vulnerability to them all. What happens when a malicious actor designs a self-replicating blight against wheat? What happens when a bright young startup founder, like some of the faces I see in the audience in front of me, decides to try and do something good, maybe to slow climate change, to design an ocean microbe that sucks up CO2, and that microbe's appetite outstrips its intended purpose? When it acts like an invasive species and sets off a cascade that accidentally outcompetes the phytoplankton at the base of the marine food web. The same phytoplankton responsible for 1 out of every 2 breaths of oxygen you have ever breathed, about half the oxygen in the atmosphere. These threats used to be unthinkable. Now they are almost unavoidable. And if that doesn't resonate, consider that the technologies that undergird these risks are getting exponentially cheaper, more accessible, and more powerful with each passing year. What used to require a specialized PhD just a few years ago is now an undergraduate project. What used to require an expensive laboratory is now a computer and a login to a cloud lab platform, where anyone can command sophisticated biological experiments without paying for a big centralized lab. We're already at the stage where the technology required to cause a global catastrophe fits in a basement. And we are shockingly unprepared. I'll give one example. Gene synthesis companies, which will take a string of DNA, and they'll take the file, a string of letters in a digital file, and they'll send you back the physical DNA required to create a live virus. In the mail, of all of those companies, like GenScript and Twist, about 80% of them will check to make sure that the sequence they're mailing you isn't suspicious, might not be a weapon. 80%, which is kind of like a town where only 80% of the alcohol stores check for ID. We all know where the teenagers are going to go, or in this case, the terrorists. We could make that mandatory. It wouldn't solve everything, but it'd be a cheap and simple and easy way to mitigate risk and buy time. We could make that mandatory, and we haven't. We haven't, because we wait until disaster strikes before we do something about it. We are reactive, not proactive. It's why people buy life insurance at dramatically higher rates after their spouse dies, not before. And we're also really good at avoiding negative news. When my colleagues and I talk to people about these risks, oftentimes, maybe we'll be talking to an academic who'll say, yeah, that's scary, that's possible, but thank goodness no one would ever want to create an engineered pandemic. It'd kill them too. I wish. We have to break it to them that people have already tried. There's a group called Aum Shinrikyo in the 1990s in Japan that tried to do this with Ebola. They couldn't because it was the 1990s. Or that with each passing year, war and environmental catastrophe makes more and more disgruntled refugees out of people with advanced degrees. Or that on a planet of 8 billion people, there are a handful of suicidal mass murderers. And it only takes one. So what do we do about this? To some people, the answer is mass surveillance, because if anyone can create a bioweapon in their basement, then we need to be monitoring all the basements all the time, and all the remote forests and underground caves too. We need to be reading everyone's text messages. We need to be listening to their phone calls. We need to be scanning their emails. And we need to give this power to governments around the world, the ones we kind of like and the ones we really don't. And we have to trust that they will definitely never, ever abuse this power. Who likes that idea? Yeah, me neither. Me neither. And so if we're not going to have mass surveillance, we need some way of preventing the development and distribution of these technologies. Some form of global agreement, some form of arms control. There has to be monitoring that actually respects civil liberties and privacy, and there has to be enforcement to back it up. Anything less than that, including some of the mitigation measures that governments around the world have been discussing, if we're really honest, is just buying time before someone somewhere pulls the trigger. Because if the probability of one of these things happening exponentially approaches 1, then mitigation is not the right approach. And so we need a global agreement. We need arms control for synthetic biology. The good news is that this kind of agreement is in all of our interests. You know, unless you're a terrorist group. It's certainly in the interests of powerful countries like the US and China. Now, if you're a superpower, bioweapons for your smaller, weaker neighbors, not very helpful to you. And so we should have the will. We also have the precedent. When humankind invented nuclear weapons, you know, did we throw up our hands and say, gee, I guess everyone everywhere is going to have these, we better go hide in a bunker? No, we got together, we coordinated, we made agreements, and we limited proliferation. And yes, limiting proliferation of these technologies will be harder. Nukes have a limited radius of impact. They're hard to manufacture. You need uranium, it's rare, we can monitor its radiation from space, and it requires the resources of a nation state to turn into something dangerous. None of that is true about engineered pandemics. You know, they self-replicate, they're cheap, they can be designed in a laptop and deployed in a way that threatens the entire world. So this won't be easy, but it isn't impossible. You know, all of these technologies, the next generation of AI and synbiotechnologies, they've never existed before in all of human history. We just need them to stay that way. And so it's possible, it doesn't violate any laws of physics. It can be done, it must be done. Some people will say that an agreement like this is anti-technology, it's anti-progress. You know, that we need innovation to unlock cures for cancer or solutions to our environmental problems. And it's a seductive narrative, especially to people like us that value the incredible power of technology for good. But it is a Faustian bargain. Because if we keep accelerating AI to raise the ceiling of our capabilities and lower the barrier of entry, if we keep building more and more advanced, you know, gene synthesis machines and biological design tools, we will get new medicines and new materials. We just won't be around to enjoy them for very long. As soon as the next school shooter decides that instead of killing a few people with a machine gun, they'd rather kill a few billion people with a super virus. That's not to say that we shouldn't be investing in or developing any of these technologies. Not at all. Not at all. Technologies that are defense biased, that don't have dual use potential, are fantastic. Better testing, broad spectrum antivirals, better environmental monitoring systems. Fantastic. We should be developing those and developing them quickly. But offense-dominant technologies that distribute catastrophe weapons, those need to stay in Pandora's box. Unless we want bioweapons for all future of unmitigated catastrophe weapons, or a surveillance web so oppressive it'd make Orwell blush, we need an agreement. We need arms control for synthetic biology. The current trajectory is dark, but it is not inevitable, not unavoidable. A safer, wiser future is possible. We just have to choose it. Thank you. I think we have time for a little bit of Q&A. So if anyone wants to ask a question, please put your hand up. I see a hand in the back. Maybe if you've got a very loud voice, a mic is coming. Okay, great.
Hey, Sam, thanks a lot. I'm on the pessimistic side. but I love your optimism. How do you overcome the narrative, but if we don't do it, then Chinese do it first? Which is the thing that's being sold by all the governments to its citizens.
Yeah. This one is actually easier with synthetic biology because we have to ask, do what? You know, if the Chinese distribute catastrophe weapons to everyone, well then they're in as much trouble as we are. And the benefits of this technology, as we talked about, will be limited in duration as soon as anyone gets their hands on the capacity to, access them. And so I think part of the answer is if you're China, maybe you think you've already got the answer. You're going to do that whole surveillance system in everyone's basement. And so you can afford perhaps to let the technology get out there. You can lock down in much more draconian fashion than we can. I don't think that's fully true. Because you still have all of the environmental risks, all of the invasive species risks. If those sound a little bit overblown to people, just look at our history with industrial chemistry. What happened there? Well, our pattern is we try and create narrow solutions to narrow problems, like engine knocking or refrigerant cooling, and we accidentally knock 1 billion points off global IQ with leaded gasoline or blow a hole in the ozone layer with CFCs. And that's our pattern with thalidomide, with DDT, with Vioxx. And those were all chemicals. They have a decay rate, a half-life. They disappear slowly. With industrial biology, we'll do the opposite. Think DDT or PFAS that breeds. We don't get to keep doing that without knocking out a load-bearing wall in planetary ecology, and that affects everybody. We're kind of all in this together. I think we have time for one more.
How do you look at the potential of agri-terrorism? Thank you. The potential of agri-terrorism. I'm thinking large cattle herds, any kind of domesticated animals that we use for essentially our food supply, and the risk of foreign powers, any powers really, targeting those and, basically weaponizing food supply through potential viruses, synthetically produced, and how could we battle that?
Right, this is a known risk. There's things we can do to mitigate it, better wastewater testing and genomic sequencing, things like that. The problem is those are just mitigators. They're reducing the risk, but it still leaves the disaster potential unchecked. And so I think the answer is, frankly, the same as the rest of these risks, which is there are certain technologies that just need to stay in Pandora's box. And obviously, there's early indications that foreign adversaries have already experimented with what it would take to do things like this. So yeah, it's definitely possible and concerning. I think that's time. Thank you so much, everybody.